Welcome back. A deserted desert. Precaution taking center court in tennis paradise as the BNP Paribas Open will not be held at this time. For much more on this story and how the tennis world is dealing with it, we bring in Tennis Channel's correspondent, also from 60 Minutes and Sports Illustrated, John Wertheim. You've been on top of this story since Sunday, Saturday, when all the news broke. You've been covering the sports world for a long time. This is unprecedented territory. Has there been another story like this, John, that you've covered in the sporting world?
Certainly not that I've covered. We've had games get postponed. We've had some events. We've had Olympic boycotts. But I can't remember anything like this, where preemptively we've had an event get canceled, and now it looks like this will be the first of many. Someone said, look, we didn't have Olympic Games in the 40s, and in 1919, because of the Spanish flu, we didn't have a Stanley Cup. So the fact that we're going back 80 and 100 years to find analogies, I think that tells you all you need to know.
This tournament has said it's not canceled. It just will not be held at this time, John. We saw Coachella, Stagecoach, those big events in that same area being postponed until October. What are the chances the BNP Paribas Open gets played later this year? When could that happen?
That's a great question. I mean, we all know that the tennis calendar is jam-packed, and events that have signed up to have sanctions with the tours have their week on the calendar. So it's not as though you could just knock those aside. I think there is so much we don't know. So we don't know how this is going to affect different parts of the world. We don't know if this curve is being flattened, to use this voguish term. I've heard murmurs that maybe Indian Wells could happen after the U.S. Open. But again, there are other events that have those dates on the calendar. Of course, the flip side is, look, if there's a certain part of the world where it is not safe to hold public gatherings, and we hope it is in everywhere. But, you know, I just think we need to wait and see. Right now, I think, though, it's hard to imagine a week of the calendar getting bumped without some extenuating circumstance.
Yeah, the tennis calendar is always so jam-packed. I mean, these players play for basically 11 months out of the year. Player safety, number one above all, also the safety of fans. When it comes, though, to ranking points, money, what happens there with these events being canceled, postponed, and what could be a potential remedy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I mean, the one-word answer is unprecedented. We've just never had this before. And right now, look, it's a rolling 52-week ranking system, and the Indian Wells points are supposed to fall off a week from Monday, as they ordinarily would. But a lot of players are saying, wait a second, it's not as though I'm injured. It's not as though I lost. You have an event that decided not to be held. If you're, for example, Dominic Thiem, the defending champion, is it fair that those points just absolutely fall off of his ranking? So that's something that's being discussed right now. I mean, it's the same thing with prize money. There are discussions afoot underway right now to say, listen, I went to Indian Wells. You guys decided not to hold the tournament. Shouldn't you owe me something? So this is all something that's being negotiated. You hope this will be dealt with fairly and the lawyers won't have to be called in. But again, we have never been here. This is not the kind of thing where you turn to page 36 in the bylaws and there's an easy black letter law answer. So this is all being addressed as we speak right now. As it stands right now at this minute, the ranking points will fall off for players as if this event just regularly happened on the calendar. But that's something that's still being undetermined.
Unprecedented indeed. Of course, Roger Federer was not in the desert. He was not going to play Indian Wells this year. But as one of the top players in the world, what type of role did he have in the decision-making process?
I'm told there were a lot of discussions and a lot of ad hoc meetings over the weekend as we learned about this case in the desert and as organizers were getting together and deciding what to do about this event. And I'm told Roger Federer from Europe was available on video conference and was very much part of these discussions with ATP players about what to do. So he is not there in presence, but he was there very much as a member joining by video conference and very much a part of these discussions.
A lot of players have reacted, John, over social media. What are some of the things that have stood out to you?
Yeah, I think we're talking about players who just don't know what to do. And this story is changing by the hour, but spare a thought for Jannik Sinner. He is 18 years old. He's in the top 75. He's having this great ascent. He is from northern Italy. Well, as you know, northern Italy has been hit especially hard. The entire country now is effectively on lockdown. So here's an 18-year-old kid who's making his move in tennis. He's about 6,000 miles away from home. and everyone, including his family back home, essentially isn't allowed outdoors. So what do? You're a teenager and you're wrestling with this. We're hearing a lot of stories about players who are just sort of throwing up their hands and saying, I'm not sure what my next move is. And again, this story is developing so quickly. Travel regulations are changing by the hour. And I think one thing we see is that players have very different means in this sport, and they also have very different priorities. And some players can hop on their private jet and get home, and the vast majority of players are really sort of stuck right now, and they're on social media. They're watching these news reports the same way everyone else is.
Interesting that we talked about earlier today, some breaking news earlier in the show that the Fed Cup finals have been postponed. They were supposed to be held starting April 14th in Budapest. Well, Hungary has now postponed all public gatherings, sporting events of more than 100 people present. So now the Fed Cup finals need to find a new home. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, one of my reactions is it was about 36 hours ago that we were talking about Indian Wells, and people were weighing in and saying, look, is this the right decision? And here are the pros and here are the cons. And in the 2.5 days since, what we've seen are a lot of other events, some sporting events, some public gatherings following suit. And the event that on Sunday night that seemed to shock the tennis world, and this became a national news story, that really seems to have set a precedent. And we're only 3 days later, but we're seeing a lot more events take a cue from Indian Wells.
Yeah, the New York City Half Marathon has been canceled. Of course, the Ivy League not playing their basketball postseason event. So this is the start. I know you're going to be on top of it throughout the next couple days, weeks. Thanks for your time here on Tennis Channel Live, John.